Now it's my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, and I met him during the 2014 Innovation Awards program, where there were 200 nominees, and Mr. Teich's company, Seahorse Bioscience, was one of the winners. And as we told him earlier, one of the benefits of being a winner is having him speak at our breakfast. It's really, he didn't know it was benefit to us, but we advertise it as a benefit to the winners. Teich founded Seahorse Bioscience in 2001 to exploit new technology for measuring and understanding cellular health. In 2006, Seahorse introduced the world's first extracellular flux analyzer for the study of living cells in vitro. Since then, the Seahorse XF analyzers and their successors have revolutionized the study of metabolism and the mitochondria of biologists and researchers throughout the world, while Seahorse has developed into a profitable company employing 200 associates and exporting products from Massachusetts to laboratories and universities in every major country of the world. Prior to forming Seahorse, Mr. Teich led the growth, management, buyout, and sale of Inframetrics, Inc., the world's leading manufacturer of thermo-imaging systems for industrial and law enforcement applications. He also served as director of SSG Optronics, Inc., which was sold to L3 Communications, and he was a private investor in a number of young, high-tech companies. In 1999, Mr. Teich negotiated the merger of Inframetrics with FLIR Systems, Inc. to form the world's largest supplier of commercial thermal imaging systems. During his 30-year career, Mr. Teich has led engineering and marketing teams in the development and commercialization of a diverse range of electro-optical, ultrasound, and biochemical instruments for Honeywell, Damon Corporation, and Cyber-Gorning Diagnostics, Inc. Mr. Teich is a graduate of Lehigh University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Please give a warm SBANE welcome to Jay Teich.
Thank you. So I've spent most of my career in high-tech, high-growth, expensive, young companies. So what I'm going to show you today, I'll tell you the story of Seahorse Bioscience, and I'd like to leave you with 3 ideas that you might consider if you ever are crazy enough to start your own company and face some of the problems that we've faced. So in 2001, I spun out a company from this company, FLIR, which is the thermal imaging business that I had sold. And that's a thermal image, you may see. And I was looking for something interesting to do, and it turned out that there was a scientist at one of the large pharmaceutical companies in the US who was using the thermal imaging cameras to measure thermogenesis in cells. So thermogenesis is the heat that's produced by cells in the course of metabolism. And they were particularly interested because at the time, this pharma and others had noticed that hibernating animals burn fat to stay warm in the winter. And they thought, gee, if we can come up with a pill that does the same thing for humans, what a wonderful treatment for obesity. So he had developed this invention where using thermal imaging, he would measure heat produced by cells, by animals, and by humans for the purpose of studying thermogenesis. And I vetted this with market research firms and experts and the management of the pharma, and it really looked like a great opportunity. So we spun it out. I raised $6.5 million of venture capital plus some individuals. And we took this project on the left here, which is the equipment that the scientist was using. It has a calibrated, chrome-plated salad bowl from Target. That's a very important part of it in the middle. And we turned into a beautiful instrument that would measure 5 millikelvin, so 5/1000ths of a degree temperature change was detectable using thermal imaging. So it was a wonderful product. And I'd learned, that market development is as hard as technology development, and particularly in this case, there was no market. So right in the beginning, I hired a VP of sales and marketing. We started going to conferences, we'd get meetings, we went to almost every farm in the US and kind of explored the opportunity, and we came away realizing that there really was a nice opportunity because cell metabolism is very complicated. The way your cells turn fuel into energy, which is ATP, it's like the electrical supply for your cells, is a very complicated process. And there were no good tools and there were no standards for people to report on it and share data. So it was a great market opportunity. The problem was we built that nice instrument, we shipped 2 of them to this pharma and asked the scientists to go run them. We should get much better data than he got with the salad bowl, right? But he couldn't even reproduce his own data. So I hired 2 PhDs and put them in his lab, and months went by, and we finally discovered that it never was going to work because a lot of the data he had shown us in the beginning was what he thought it should have been like rather than what it really was like. So we were off by an enormous amount. We were at 5 millikelvin. We needed to go to 20 microkelvin, which was almost impossible. It would have been really expensive and not commercializable. And fortunately, we still had half our money left. But we were now sitting, I pulled the plug on this project, and 1.5 years gone by, half the money's gone, and we're sitting with no product and no customers. So I want to divert a little bit into my first lesson learned here. So I'm sure you all know that building a successful company takes a great team. I mean, that's obvious. And one of the things I explored about 5 years ago, I did a little homework, interviewed a bunch of people about the idea of when you've got a small company, is it better to hire management from a large company or from other small companies? And it was interesting that the kind of conventional wisdom is that the problem with hiring somebody from a large company is they're used to having a whole staff of people to work with, and they're not going to be able to, you know, when you ask them to sweep the floor, and it turns out it's them, there's only 3 people to sweep the floor in the company, they're not going to do well. What I found, though, over the years and watching other companies is that's not really true. Good managers from large companies have a lot of skills and a big network to draw on. And it's typically, they sometimes enjoy the change of being a manager to being actually doing the work. So that's not really the issue. But there is a big issue, and that is when you start these businesses, if it's the kind of business I've been in, you raise a bunch of money, you figure you'll burn through it, you'll get your business going, and then the sales in green will pick up and start to replace the cash that you're using before you run out. You never expect to do more than one financing. But what often happens is you don't quite make it. And when you get to this point where it seems like you're near the end, it's pretty tough. And it may happen more than once because somehow you manage to raise some more money and then it happens again and again. You know, many of these companies that I've seen, they're on Series E by now before they're profitable. So the problem is, emotionally, for your management, you're swinging between ecstasy and despair, right? And it's very tough. It really is very tough. So there's compensation for that, and that, of course, is stock options. But as my VP of Sales and Marketing wrote to me one day when times were tough, and I was telling him how great his stock options were, he was pointing out what he had at his last company, which he's not getting anymore. But he's stuck with us. He's still been with us for 14 years. He's a good guy. So I think the message is, these are the kind of things that you need to have people that can survive going from a large company to a small. They have to have ideally been through an experience where things were really bad and they survived, and they have the self-confidence to be able to keep going. So back to Seahorse, which was called thermogenic imaging at the time. No technology, no sales. We decided to take a low-risk approach and take some existing technology and modernize it and shrink it rather than invent something new. We came up with this little thing on the right. We said we can take 24 of those and squeeze them all into a little plastic microplate and have a wonderful product. We were all excited about it. So here's a second lesson. I was concerned about having a second failure, and none of us were biologists. We were 8 engineers, basically. So I asked our VP of Sales and Marketing to go find me 3 scientists or managers from among the top 10 pharmas in the world, and they would be our guiding light. They would be our customer design team. He got all excited because finally he had something to sell. He could sell customer design team memberships, even though they were free. And he ended up finding 11 scientists and managers from 7 of the top 10 pharmas in the world and 1 lonely academic from Harvard. We met with them as a group, and then every quarter we would go visit each one of these on their site and show them what we were doing, let them see our parts and our data. and give us guidance. In the first meeting we had, we presented this concept I was telling you about, which we were all excited about it, and they hated it. And over lunch and talking with these guys, we ended up leading to a new technology, which is the one that has survived and is currently the basis of our new product. But now we wanted to turn that into an instrument, and there was a problem. It was going to cost a lot of money, and we were just about out. And I went back to our venture investors and said, hey, you know, we got this great market and technology, and they said, yeah, we've heard that story before from you, and we're not sure we want to pay for it. So the customer design team came in handy a second time, because what I did is I hired a market research firm, and I had them interview each one of these 11 design team members. And the venture guys that were considering investing could sit in on the call, they could ask questions, they could read the interviews, and it was almost as good as having real customers. And we did get funded at a pretty decent deal. And in fact, the customer design team members ended up being many of our buyers in the first year. You can see more than half of our buyers in the first year were these people we built a relationship with while they were helping us design the instrument. So over the years, we've raised money quite a few times. And I can tell you one thing that does not work is going back to your investors and saying, we're out of money, we need more. They don't like that. So I learned a trick actually from a CFO of a internet company, and it's called the Finquisition. So give your investors something to get excited about. So another thing we learned from these design team members was they didn't want to clean our instrument, which meant that everything that got wet, that had cells, media, or water touching it, had to be in plastic. So we needed a very sophisticated plastic consumable to go with our product. And we found this great little company, about $1 million business out in Chicpee, Mass. They were experts in designing exactly what we wanted, and fortunately, it was for sale. I ended up doing a deal with them. So I bought the business as a stock swap, no cash, and got their investors and our investors both to throw money in the combined business to get it to go. So we did a financing, but under great terms because it was to pay for the acquisition. And that business, which has grown, we basically propped up sales and marketing, and it grew like crazy in the beginning, and it's turned out to be a great business. So it was a good deal for everybody, for their investors, our investors, the employees, and the business. This is now our center for manufacturing for the company out in Chicpee. In 2009, same thing happened. We were running out of money. I found a business called Bioprocessors. They had built this monstrous piece of equipment that was used to automate the development, the optimization of manufacturing of biologic drugs. And we believed that we could shrink that onto a benchtop and knock the cost from several $1 million down to a few $100,000. And so we did the same deal. We did a stock swap to buy it, and their investors, they had 5 of the top life science tools company venture investors in the Boston area, and their investors and our investors both put money into the deal, so we got financing to make this all a success, and it carried us forward. That business, we spent about a year looking at this opportunity, the market and technology, decided we had something better to do, which is to build a low-cost version of our current product. So we serviced their existing customers, made a bunch of profit, got some great employees out of the deal, and it turned out to be a worthwhile thing to do. Okay, so I've given you 3 lessons here, and I'll just show you what was the outcome for Seahorse when we applied these things. So we built now 3 generations of equipment, a 24-well instrument, a 96-well instrument, and just recently a 6-well instrument, along with consumables and kits and training that goes with it. We've now, by the end of this year, we'll have sold 1,000 instruments around the world. We have offices in Denmark and in China to service those 2 continents. There have been periods of time like last year when exactly a third of our sales have been in those 3 continents. It's really very much a global market. We're in virtually every therapeutic area, so our scientists using our technology are working on almost every disease. And they publish. It's very important in this industry that your technology gets used in publications, and we now have 1,200 publications that include our data, including 100 in the top 3 journals in our space, which is Cell, Nature, and Science. And the business has grown. So this year, our target is to get over $40 million in sales. We think we can keep that going. We just introduced in June a new product. It's at a third of the price point of the previous products. And we believe now that as the market has evolved, there's a slice of the market below where we've been operating in the $100,000 to $200,000 price range that's probably 3 to 5 times larger than where we are now. And that's how we're going after it, is with this new product that's at about a $50,000 to $60,000 price point. So we're transforming the company this year to try to sell 3 to 5 times more units at 1/3 the price. And it's a very exciting time for us. So that's the story. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. That's a good question. So we're very open with employees. We share a lot of information. We have frequent company meetings. Most of the time, the employees are kind of buffered from that horrible cycle of ups and downs. It's the management that suffers a little more. But you know, they've been very excited about what we're doing. They're very well informed and involved with customers, and they see what our technology is doing for the customers, and that helps a lot. And after we've been through a few of these near-death experiences, they realize that they're not as bad as they could be. We've had a very loyal customer base, very low employee base with very, very low turnover, only a few % a year, actually. Good question. Every 2 years, we did something to try to boost sales. We brought out a new product. In 2010, I raised money specifically to grow the commercial organization. So I had wanted to spend the first year selling only in the US because it's easier to support. But we had tremendous demand from Europe. The cell metabolism space is actually more mature in Europe. So we'd go over there. One of us would go over there, do a trip, meet 3 customers, and within a few months have 3 orders. We couldn't turn it away. So we needed to have support, local support. That's really important to customers. And we had a guy who had been a customer who got laid off, and we ended up employing him as our scientist to support customers in Europe. And he convinced us that Denmark was the center of Europe. So we set up shop there, and it turns out to be a really good place to be. It's relatively employer-friendly, great employees, easy to get to all parts of Europe, very European culture. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. It was maybe 3 years after we'd started sales. Okay. We have a very high value product, 80% gross margins, a lot of money to spend on support, which we need to. So we had to have that organization. And then 3 years ago, we started in China because the China market for research is very robust. The Chinese government is putting a lot of money into research. It's actually easier to get money in China than it is in the US for research equipment. So we opened up a small office there. It's now, I think, 8 employees. We've got 2 salespeople that work with dealers. We have scientific support, training, and repair of the equipment and consumables. And you know, I think if you have a high value product, there's a market for it worldwide. Having a presence there is a lot better than trying to work through dealers. Yeah, you know what's interesting is when we started in 2000, the typical life cycle of a VC-funded company was 5 to 7 years. That's when they won their money out. But that vintage of companies have taken way longer to get out because the IPO market's been gone. A lot of them are 7, 10, and more years. We have some investors that have been in for 14 years, which is very unusual. They do need an exit. Normally, a company like this gets sold to some much larger company, and that's probably likely for us at some point, you know, in the next few years. I don't think we're going to be doing an IPO. It's maybe possible, but I don't think we want to. I don't think there's enough benefit to us. And then there's other options, like what I did with the thermal imaging company, is we had 3 competitors that were just killing each other, and we put the 3 of them together, all by stock swaps, and built a really strong business. Immediately raised prices 20, 30%. Became very profitable. Put all the R&D together, so we didn't have to do 3 separate product development things in different parts of the world. And that was just a fantastic deal for everybody, employees, investors, and the company. So that's another choice, is some type of strategic deal. Yeah, it's a big problem. You have to keep your investors engaged in what's going on and keep them away from all the bad news if you can. So there was always, as I was saying, every time we did a fundraising, there was something exciting about it. So twice it was these acquisitions. In 2010, we got into a point where we realized if we doubled our commercial organization, we could double our sales. You know, because the market had come along that way. So they invested willingly in 6 months, we had doubled our entire commercial organization. They were excited about that. They saw the reward. It paid off richly for them. It's a challenge. As a CEO, that's a big part of your job, is making sure your investors are part of your team and are enthusiastic, because these guys could have walked away from us at any point. It would have been a disaster. Trying to raise money when your existing investors are bailing out is really hard. Nobody bailed out. One of them kind of got to the end of their fund and stopped continuing, but it was only 1 out of 7 VCs. The rest of them have all continued to participate. Good people. Into Japan. So actually, we got into Japan pretty early. We got a dealer there. So all of we don't have a direct presence. We have a dealer, but it's a good dealer. And over time, we become the biggest part of his business. So he keeps growing. The pharmaceutical market's very strong there. And there's a pretty decent research community as well. So it's not as big. You know, it's interesting that China really is number 2 now. It's the 2nd largest country for us. With a tremendous amount of opportunity, and that's why we felt we needed to have a direct presence there, whereas Japan is, you know, kind of in the size of Germany or the UK, and we can handle that with dealers pretty easily. Yeah, so that was interesting because there were 2 owners. One was had worked for Jack Welch at GE, very sophisticated guy. Saw that we were a sophisticated company with management that was all from larger businesses and was on board with it right away. The other guy had built his own company from nothing and transformed it kind of into this one, and was just at the opposite end of the spectrum, and he had a lot of heartburn about it. And I had many, many personal meetings with him and kind of coached him into it. It was not easy. But in the end, you know, it was a wonderful deal because they had a business that was struggling. And by bringing some of our management expertise in, we helped. It was a great group of people and good technology. We helped them really make it successful. So these guys made way more money by doing the deal, or will, by doing the deal with us, than they would have if they just sold the business for cash. Yeah, it helps a lot. So the first time anybody looks at our business, they're looking for the razor blades that go with the razors, you know. And if we were selling into the clinical diagnostic market, so selling instruments that go into a hospital that get used for tests all the time on people, the instrument doesn't matter. What matters is the consumables. That's where you make all your money. But when you're in the research market, you've got an instrument that gets used occasionally, not all the time. It doesn't eat up that much of the consumables. So in our space, having 80% instrument and 20% aftermarket is pretty good. And but you got to make a lot of money on the instruments. We get 80% margins on the instruments, right? So it takes investors a little while to get comfortable with that, but they make great businesses. You know, some other companies in our space have no consumables. So we're actually kind of ahead of the average because of that. This one was kind of unusual because the guy that we were dealing with was one of these people that can not be truthful with you and you can't tell because he believes what he's telling you is true. So that slowed us down because we were a bunch of engineers. We actually had a deal with the pharmaceutical company. They owned some shares in the company in return for doing all the biological assay development for us. So we were kind of removed from it. And as the months went by, though, I mean, I was learning a lot. I was reading journal articles and talking to people and learning a lot. And I realized that we needed somebody else looking at it, so I hired 2 PhD scientists and put them in this guy's lab down south. And pretty quickly after that, we figured out what was going on. And then pulling the plug was actually hard. Even though we knew it wasn't going to work, like killing this program we've been working on for a year and a half, that was a really tough decision. But we did it, and very quickly after that, we came up with a better technology, which was much, in the end, it was way better. And that we've actually got our own IP on, and it's been a good thing. When the second company we bought was spending $1 million a year on IP, even though they barely had a product, right? I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I think, a patent cost you $50K anyways, and then to defend it's expensive. And so what I think is best, rather than patenting everything, is pick a few things that you think are really strategic but do a really good job getting IP. And so we file in the US, in Europe, in China, because even though the system there is a little bit immature and not well enforced, over time, for China to really become a competitive entity with Western companies, Western economies, they have got to get their intellectual property protection straightened out, and they're making good progress on it. So we filed in China, and we got patents in China that I think are going to be valuable. We also filed in India, but I have found the opposite's true there. We got a couple patents. We have a big patent firm who had never done it before. The patents were granted, and a year later, we get this letter from the Indian associates saying, you have to file a working report for your patent. I thought, oh, what's that? None of us knew what that was. Well, it turns out you have to work your patent, which means licensing it to an Indian company to manufacture your product. And you have to file a report every year showing that you're doing that. And if you don't, the Indian government will take your IP and they will license it to an Indian company and they will determine the royalty rate. None of us knew this, right? So I guess I wouldn't recommend India yet. But China, I think, is valuable. And then when we bought, we actually, I got a letter a few summers ago from a tiny little company in Germany, and they said, hey, you're infringing our patents. And they sent me their patents, and they were almost carbon copies of ours, filed 2 years early. It was shocking. It was another one of these near-death experiences. But I did a lot of homework on it and eventually licensed those patents, and then a couple years later, we just bought those patents, so we now own them. And they had filed in Japan, and they had stronger IP in Europe than we had, so those fitting together with our strong US and China has created a really great patent portfolio. Yes, so in the beginning, I don't know if you noticed, the company was called Thermogenic Imaging, which made sense with the original technology, and the company we bought was called Innovative Microplate. So nobody could spell thermogenic imaging. No one could find it on the internet and all that. So we had this, we had these two names. We had to come up with a new name. So we had a contest. All the employees were in the contest, and we needed a name that was easy to spell, easy to pronounce, easy to find on the web because it wasn't competing with a lot of other companies, and we could have a little logo that you could just print very small and people would recognize it. Lots of ideas. Oh, it had to have a story. We wanted to be able to tell a story about it because we'd go to these seminars and a lot of scientists would come in the room and we'd never get a chance to find out who they were and they'd leave, and I wanted them to remember. I thought a story would help them remember. So it was about to be, the winner was 3 Dog Bioscience because we could tell a story about how the 3 founders had dogs and whatever. And I had a board meeting coming up and we were all set to go with that, and then everybody went home and told their spouse the name. Well, 3 people came back and they said, oh my God, I told this new name to my wife, and she said, what? You guys do research on dogs? You have to go in there and quit tomorrow. So that was done. So we're trying to figure out what to do. The VP of Sales and I are trying to figure it out, and the board meeting's coming up, and he's really into going to the beach and the ocean. He's coming up with a lighthouse and all this stuff, and I'm into horses. My family, we own a horse farm, and we're big into horses, and I'm coming up with thoroughbred and all these names. And finally, at the last minute, we said, you know what, let's compromise. Let's make it Seahorse. And it turns out competing on the internet is all like nonprofits. It was easy for us to get right to the top of the list on Google. You make a little picture of a seahorse, you can shrink it really small and still see it. It's intriguing, people ask about it, you know, it's just been a fantastic name. And we can do anything we want with it. I mean, it doesn't matter what the technology is with that name. So it worked out really well.